on this so on this session today, this is our agenda. We're going to go over the Michigan exam results. That's the item that a lot of people are most interested in hearing. We're going to talk about the way the exam is developed, because understanding the way the exam is developed will go a long way to helping you understand why we recommend that you study in the way that we recommend. Stephanie will talk about how to pre-register for the exam. We'll also talk about how to choose between remote versus in-person testing. Obviously, we will go over some test prep tips for you. That's probably the main reason that you're here today. Your best tool is going to be the IC&RC candidate guide, and we're going to go through each of the individual credentials and talk about the exam for each one. And then we're going to talk about what may not even happen for you. We're going to talk about what to do if you need to retake the exam. But first, let's take a deep breath collectively, because this is the most stressful part of getting the credential. And honestly, everyone, I can't say everyone, but nearly everyone feels that way. So if you're feeling anxious or nervous about this exam, please know that you're not alone. The reason that we developed this series or this session is that I found out when I started working here, I met with a lot of people who had not been able to pass the exam. And I found out that was for two reasons. One was because they weren't studying the right materials. So we want to prevent that for you. So we're going to go over the correct materials to study today. The second reason was anxiety. And a lot of times the reason for the anxiety was that they had waited until almost the very end of the development plan before taking the exam. And obviously, if you are worried about your position, you're worried that you're in job jeopardy, you're less likely to do well on the exam. So we're going to talk about the time frame that we recommend so for both of those reasons, studying the right materials and to help decrease anxiety is the reason that we developed this session. And in Michigan, we do very well. So a lot of times people will say Michiganders struggle on the IC&RC exams, and that's actually not true. We do very well comparatively to other states. So IC&RC, if you're not familiar, is the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. And they are what some folks call our parent organization. And they offer these exams in 49 of the 50 states, all branches of the military and other countries. And so we draw on a lot of resources. And in Michigan, you can see that overall our test scores are staying the same or going up slightly. And the areas that we're going down, I'll talk about that. For the AADC, our pass rate is about 66% this past year, which is up from the year prior of 60%. The ADC goes up every year. So those of you who are working toward the ADC, you have a lot of great people ahead of you who've taken the exam who could probably offer good tips to you. For the CCS, that's the Certified Clinical Supervisor, we have the least number of people, I believe, out of all of our exams taking the CCS. And for that reason, it looks like a huge drop from 93% down to 70%, but it really isn't, because it's a smaller number of people, and it would only take a couple of people to make that a big difference. So I don't want that to scare those of you who are going for your CAADC. For peer recovery, we are at 70%. We're down a little bit, but again, that is an exam that is taken less often than our ADC and AADC exams. So even though it looks a little bit lower, again, I don't want to concern the people who are going for that credential. The prevention specialist stays in the mid 60%. And again, that's a good score as we compare ourselves to other regions that are taking the same exam. So let's talk about how the exam is developed, because sometimes I hear people say this is a Michigan exam, and that's the reason we entitled this session the IC&RC test prep session, so that you understand that it's not just Michigan. So this exam is updated every 3 to 5 years, and the way that it's updated is through starting with a job analysis. And what that means is that we get a survey, all of us who have the credential, once every 3 to 5 years, and it will say, are these still the domains that you're working in? Is this still current? Is this still accurate? And if so, are you doing them in the same percentages that you did the last time we surveyed you, and not you specifically, but the field? So it's a pretty brief survey, but it's really important that when you get that, and you will get that from us here at MCBAP because we do it on behalf of IC&RC. And we want to make sure that Michigan is well represented so that we understand what is it that's going on in the field. Are there changes that need to be made to the exam? Maybe we're learning new things and we want to make sure that that's highlighted. We want to make sure this is always up-to-date current information. Because if you've been in this field long enough, if you look back even 10 years ago, harm reduction was not as prevalent of a topic as it is today. So you can see a lot of trends that have changed over the years, and this exam has to keep up with that. So they get thousands of data points from all of us who fill out the job analysis. And then based on that, they decide what knowledge and skill sets are needed in order to create the exam. And then from that, all of the exam questions are developed based on that. And one thing to know is that throughout this process, those of us who work in the field are the subject matter experts that are creating the exam. So literally, those of us who work in the field, a lot of people from Michigan have taken part in this, is that we actually get trained by Prometric, which is the testing company, on how to create a good test question. But they don't give us guidance on what the questions should be because we are the subject matter experts in the field. And subject matter experts come from across the world in order to be trained in how to write these items, because we don't want a test that is entirely derived from people in one part of the United States or one branch of the military. So we work very hard to make sure that every region is well represented throughout the process. And then once an exam item is written, so a subject matter expert is trained by Prometric on how to write the questions. They write a test question. It's looked at by other subject matter experts in the same room to see if they feel like it's a good question. And if so, then it goes on to the test. And so what you won't know when you're taking the exam is which of these questions are brand new. The ones that are brand new are not scored as part of your final score because the question itself is being tested. So, for example, if no one got the question right, it's a bad question, so it'll get tossed out. If everyone got the question right, that means it's knowledge that you could ask someone in Kroger and they would get the answer right. So it's really not testing expertise in a specialty. And so that would get tossed out. And so once it undergoes that, it seems like it is a solid question and it's performing well on the exam. Only then does it become part of the exam pool that is then put onto the official test. We're always looking at bias on the exam, and IC&RC just, excuse me, added a bias review to all steps of the exam development within the last couple of years. It's one of the more exciting things that we've seen happen, and it has been really interesting. So I was part of one of those. And one of the things they looked at is, and these are people that are not subject matter experts in substance use, they're experts in bias on exam questions. So they have a different training altogether. And what they noticed, for example, is that I was working on the certified clinical supervisor exam. And what they noticed is every time there was a victim, it was a woman. And so they said that represented bias, which of course it does. And so the exam questions were updated to be gender neutral. And so that's just one tiny example of the way that this test is constantly being reviewed for bias prevention. And so that has been a really great development over this last year. Because this exam goes through all of us as subject matter experts, and it goes through such a rigorous process, and it is developed in partnership with psychometricians, it's considered legally defensible. And so if you went to court and they said, how do we even know that you're a substance, that you have any right to even be doing this work in substance use, This exam alone is legally defensible, showing that you have basic knowledge in the field that you tested in and passed. It's also what's considered psychometrically sound, which is a fancy way of saying that the test was developed using all the most up-to-date and evidence-based ways of creating a standardized exam. So let's talk about special accommodations. I feel like we skipped some. Hold on one second. Um, so special accommodations is if you feel like you are going to need special accommodations, you want to ask for the special accommodations at least 60 days prior to the exam date and make sure that you have medical verification for that. Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that? Stephanie is the one, as she said, that will be doing your registration, helping you get set up for the test.
There's also special accommodations if you are an English as a second language speaker. So all you would need to do is complete the accommodations form, notate that English is a second language, and you can get extended time, and you can bring a English dictionary along with you, or they provide it. I can't remember. I'll have to look at my email, but either way, I'll let you know which one it is so that you know before the test, because I don't want you to be confused on that one. But yeah, accommodations, if you need it, just do it. You can get extra time. You can get a separate room where I don't know if you can see my office. I don't do fluorescence, so my lights are always off. So you can have a separate room where the lights are off. You might need maybe to be able to walk around. Maybe you need a snack. Accommodations covers all of that. So keep an open mind if you have anxiety over the exam. Talk to your doctor, see what you can work out. So
Thanks, Stephanie.
yeah.
And as Stephanie was saying, it requires a medical professional, so that could be a therapist or a physician, and they will indicate in there exactly what accommodations you need. So when she's talking about an extra snack, if you're diabetic and that's something that you need, that would be a reason for it. If you have migraines and you need the lights out, that would be the reason for it. So they'll say what the accommodation need is. And so that will help the test center accommodate that. And the reason we need an advance notice about that is it may take a bit of extra time to make sure that that testing site is ready for you with those accommodations. And then Stephanie, talk about pre-registration.
I sure can. So I'm gonna pop a link in the chat so you guys have access to it, but that link will take you exactly to what I'm fixing to talk about. What you're gonna do is you're gonna complete the registration form. It's gonna provide all of the information I need to register you for the exam. If you are completing the special accommodations form, make sure that you are submitting that along with your registration form. Make sure that you're also paying at the same time and submit all of that information, the registration form, your accommodations form, and the payment together via email to info@mcbap.com or via fax to 517-347-1288. Once we receive all of that, I register you within 2 business days. If you have not received an email from info@mcbap.com, assistant@mcbap.com saying we've received your exam registration form and your payment, you'll be registered on this date and here are the next steps. That means we haven't received something, and you should reach out and see what that is. We try and catch everybody and say either we haven't received payment, but we have received your exam registration form, or we've received payment, but we haven't received your exam registration form. We try and catch you, but we can't, we try, right? So please make sure you're submitting everything all at once so that we can get you registered in a timely manner. Once we have everything, you're going to get an email from SMT Notice. We do not register, we register you, you get the email from SMT Notice, and then you are going from there with your primary contact is going to be SMT/Prometric/IQT. They're all the same company. And you're going to get to choose whether you take the test in person and go to a testing site or you do remote testing. Ta-da! All day long, I will encourage you In the land of Zoom, because we're all doing this via Zoom, I will tell you go to an in-person site if you can, because the day that I have an important meeting, I know my internet's going down. If your internet goes down and you are remote testing at home, you're going to have to pay for a reset. There's a lot of variables for an already stressful day that are going to be up to you when you are remote testing. Whereas if you go to a testing site and their internet goes down, then they're going to be paying for a reset, right? I don't know about you. I have fuzzy friends at home. I have a 12-year-old at home. Nobody's knocking on that door. Or if someone does knock on that door, the test is over. So if you choose to do remote testing, there are rules that you can review. They're on the website that you can look at on that same page where you go to register. We also send them out via email when we say, hey, we've got your payment and we've gotten your registration form. Review them more than once. Think about it before you sign up for it. That's my 2 cents. I don't know if Jennifer has anything else to add, but think
That
about
was
it.
great. We all at MCBAP strongly encourage in-person testing. In-person means you actually go to a facility that's all they do every day is testing. So they are the experts in that. Remote testing means you would do it at your own home or in an office. And that means that you're responsible for all of it. And so if you're extremely computer savvy and it makes more sense for you to do it remote, we will support you. But we just want you to make sure that you review all of the guidelines that we give you in order to make sure that you're set and ready for that day.
Correct. And also, when we say support you, we mean morally support you, because as far as tech support, that's going to be from SMT. We're not able to do tech support. So if you need tech support, you're going to have to contact them as well.
If you're remote testing, yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So we're going to move into the test. And so IC&RC candidate guide, this candidate guide is literally developed by IC&RC and in combination with Prometric. And what this is a guide that's specific to the exam that you are taking. So the staff now is going to, in the chat, pop in each of the candidate guides. Only download the one that is relevant to the test you're taking. Don't confuse yourself unless you're a supervisor, in which case you can have them all. But if you're taking the ADC exam, only download the one that is the IC&RC candidate guide for the CADC exam. And I really want you to download this, save it, print it out, whatever you need to do, because in the back of that is a list of references and resources. And what you need to know about those references and resources is that those were some of the exact tools that were used to create the test questions. And so when we tell you that that's a good list of resources to study, that's the reason why. There's no better place to study from than the actual place the test questions were taken from. So make sure you look in this candidate guide, look at the very end and see which of the resources and references you need to use to study. So that is the number one resource that we want to point you in the direction of. And now I'm going to give you a couple of supplemental ones, but again, the candidate guide is your primary source. For the ADC and the AADC, there is at readytotest.com, there is a new and updated IC&RC exam test for the CADC/CAADC. This resource, as you can see, is a little bit expensive. It's $149. That's the reason I encourage agencies to purchase this if you're able to, and have a resource library for your individuals. And I used to use this for my team as they were studying for their CADC and the CAADC. We would read one chapter out of it and then have a study group session. And that was a really resourceful, impactful way to study for the exam. And everyone who used that method was able to pass the CADC or CAADC exam. So it is a really good tool, again, used in combination with the resources that are in the candidate guide. A free resource that's available to you is on improvingmipractices.org. And the team is going to put in the chat the exact link for this, and this is specifically for the CADC. However, I just re-reviewed it again this morning, and it actually is a really good resource also for people seeking their CAADC. But this is a very in-depth, comprehensive list of items that you can use to study from. In this, there are sample test questions, there are flashcards, there are links to free documents that you can read. This is a really rich resource for those of you who are studying for your CADC and CAADC. And on that topic, improvingmypractices.org, if you aren't already familiar with that, not only has this specific resource, but it has tons of resources that are free for you for CE education. And I have gone through and reviewed every single one of them to either be MCBAP specific or MCBAP related. So you can actually search that site for exactly what you want. So if you need all specific MCBAP courses, you can search Improving in My Practices and find courses that are specific to substance use. Again, they're all free. A lot of them are short, so you can take a 1 hour class. If you have a meeting that's canceled, then you can use that time to actually pop over to Improving in My Practices and get an hour of credit. That really adds up over the time that you're in your development plan. For those of you who are seeking your prevention specialization, this is a wonderful resource. Nicole Augustine is a CPS herself. She lives in North Carolina, but as she was preparing for her own exam, she started putting together her notes, which ultimately became the Prevention Specialist Exam Study Guide. So that is an additional resource to go along with the IC&RC Prevention Specialist Candidate Guide that you can use. Now I'm going to move into each of the individual exams and let's talk through those. For most of the exams, with one exception, they're all 150 questions with 3 hours to take the exam. There are 25 questions that are what we talked about earlier that are pre-test questions where the question itself is being tested. You won't know the difference. You won't know which ones those are. So just answer all of them. There's no penalty for guessing, but there is a penalty if you don't answer the question. You will be marked down on that. So we do encourage you to answer and take your best guess. I strongly encourage you because a lot of the questions may be stated as which is the best answer. Because of that, you want to make sure that in all cases, even if it doesn't say the best answer, that you read all of the answers because you might think A is really good, but then when you see C, you think, oh, that's a little bit better. That actually goes into more detail. So make sure that you read every option and then choose carefully from that. Now, there's for the CADC, these are the domains over here to the right. And then you can see the weight on the exam. And what the weight on the exam means is this is the percentage of questions on that exam that is in this particular domain. So when you look at domain 3, evidence-based treatment, counseling, and referral, that's 30%. And so you can see that that's pretty heavily weighted for this particular exam. So you want to make sure that you're studying treatment, counseling, and referral when you're preparing for the exam. You want to study for all of it, but that'll give you a little idea of which is more heavily weighted. And I'll tell you too, in Michigan, how we do on this particular exam. So Stephanie did this chart and it really talks about, and it goes from the area that we did the least well in Michigan all the way down to where we performed the best. And so you can see in the area of evidence-based screening and assessment, we in Michigan averaged 72%. And so when you're thinking about that, just make sure that you really truly understand the difference between screening and assessment, and that when you're reviewing a client case, that you understand when they were screened and when they were assessed. But one other thing I'll say about this exam is that it's not related to your individual job site. This is preparing you to be able to go anywhere in the United States, the military, or other countries to work in this profession. So if you're taking the CADC exam, it's not about that particular place that you work in Michigan. You really have to think about, no matter where I worked and in what setting, what would be the best answer for this. So don't think about your specific work setting. think about your training and your education. This is the academic portion of preparing for your credential. And so you want to make sure that you are looking at it from a really broad range. For the CAADC, same thing, 3 hours, and to take the exam with 150 test questions. You'll see the domains here to the right, and you'll see which is the heaviest weighted, which is, and I don't think any one of us are surprised by this, for us as counselors, we need to be heavily focused on professional ethics and responsibilities, and so that is 31%. And so you want to make sure that you are reviewing codes of ethics, that you're taking additional classes in that, and that when you're choosing trainings to take, make sure that you're focused on that. And in Michigan, though, we did really well with ethics, so we're glad about that. And the area that we scored the lowest on was counseling and education. So from your master's program, you had those counseling theories classes. You want to pull out that information, refresh yourself on all of those counseling theories, and make sure that you have that at your top of mind when you're taking the exam, particularly how they are impacted by substance use disorder or in what context you might use those counseling theories. The Certified Clinical Supervisor exam is also 3 hours and 150 questions. And for the Certified Clinical Supervisor exam, you will be retested again a bit on your knowledge of substance use as a counselor. But the majority of the exam are in these new areas that you're going to be working as a Certified Clinical Supervisor. So you're going to want to understand how a counselor develops over their career. You're going to want to know how to assess their competencies and their performance. And you want to do that by using different clinical supervision theories. So there is a book in the candidate guide, David Powell. And if you're not familiar with David Powell's work, I do strongly recommend that you become familiar with that because he goes into great depth about counselor competencies and counselor development. And that book is used a lot for developing the exam questions. And in Michigan, again, CCSs do well in Michigan, and the area that we most needed to learn more about was program development and quality assurance. So make sure that's part of your preparation when you're working toward your CCS exam. And then you can see here how we did in the other areas for CCS domains. For the peer recovery mentor, this is the exam that's a bit shorter. It's 2 hours long and has 75 test questions. And these are the areas that you're familiar with. A lot of you have taken the CCAR. You've already gotten your state credential for peer recovery. And so a lot of this you'll be familiar with, but you will want to, again, study the resources that are in the back of that candidate guide to just refresh yourself. There's a heavy focus on ethics, and so you'll want to make sure that you are focusing a lot of your study time on that, as well as mentoring and education. In Michigan, you can see, and I don't think anyone who's ever met a peer recovery mentor in Michigan would be surprised by this, but in Michigan, in the advocacy domain, we scored 76%, so that is extremely high. So I'm really proud of that. And the area that we most needed to study was the recovery and wellness support. So if that helps you give you a little bit of tips on what to study, that is there for you. For the prevention specialist, again, it's 3 hours and 150 questions. Prevention specialists have the most domains. And the reason for that is that prevention specialists, those of you who are, you know that preventionists work in all kinds of professions, all kinds of settings. And so there is a need to have a broad scope of knowledge. But the heaviest weight in the prevention exam is on planning and evaluation. So when you're studying, make sure that you have a strong focus in that area. When we look at how we did in Michigan, the area that we wanted to learn more about was professional growth and responsibility. So when you're studying, make sure that that's part of what you're looking at as well. And I haven't said this earlier, but we are going to, at the end of the session, put these slides in the chat. So you'll have these if you've missed anything that I've talked about so far that you wanted to capture. So that's all of the individual exams. Now I'm going to talk about, just for all of the exams, what are the best practice exam tips. The first is to have a growth mindset. So I know you're nervous, well, potentially nervous about taking this exam, but I also know you've done hard things. No one works in this field because they've had it easy. And so you have done hard things before. This is a hard thing that you're going to be able to do. It only will happen with hard work, study, and practice. Again, this is the academic portion of the program. People say to me all the time, but I've worked in the field forever and I just can't pass that exam. That's because this exam is not based on your specific workplace. It's based on your specialty knowledge overall in substance use. And so make sure that you understand that throughout this process, your knowledge and your confidence will exponentially increase. People are so excited. If you've had anyone in your workplace who has received their credential or passed this exam, people are just really proud and should be of having met all of the requirements because they're rigorous. And to get ready, make sure that you recognize that there's a need for test prep. You're a little bit back in school. You want to set high standards for yourself. And it's good to take some practice exams. Like I said, that Improving in My Practices course has some practice exam questions smattered throughout. So if you're taking the CADC or CAADC, you'll want to check that out. So you want to start early. So if you're taking this session and you're testing within the next week or two, we're really excited for you and we're confident that you're going to do well. If you're a supervisor and you are working with people that are in their development plan, we strongly encourage you to have them take this session as soon as they enter into a development plan, because we want them to take their first and hopefully last attempt at the exam 9 months to 1 year of embarking on their development plan. That way, there's plenty of time left on their development plan that they can get the remainder of supervision hours, that kind of thing that they might need. And they should be able to wrap that development plan up early. Make sure that you gather your study materials from that IC&RC candidate guide, share resources with friends, use the library. A lot of people forget about our libraries, but sometimes people will say to me it's so expensive. But all of these are materials that you can check out of your library or get through interlibrary loan. Make sure that your study materials are easy to find, either in a central workplace, a central spot in your workplace, or if you have your own personal study materials, make sure that you have those easily accessible for you. And then schedule your actual test prep sessions on your calendar. So if you're doing a study group, make sure you have those in your calendar, or carve out time in your calendar to do your own personal study. Mix it up. So don't only read. I think a lot of times when we're preparing for an exam, we just read. But it really is important to use a variety of methods. So participate in a study group when we see people who haven't passed the exam and then they are able to pass the exam, one of the biggest differences is that they started participating in a study group. So what we hear is, but I don't have anybody to study with at my work location. Well, you're on this session right now with 37 other people. So you can pop in the chat right now and say, I need a study partner. And with Zoom sessions, Teams, GoToMeeting, all of these different virtual platforms, there's just a million different ways that you can get together now that we never used to be able to. And so get together, use this chat feature right now and say, I need a study buddy. Go ahead and get each other's contact information and set up meeting times that you can do this. That is a huge factor in the success because human beings are wired for stories. So when you have read something and you get together to talk about it with a peer who's in the same field, you'll tell a story about a client that you saw that week. And maybe when that study buddy is in that test session, they'll remember that story that you told them and it will make it more real and come to life for them. And they'll be able to answer those questions better on the exam. Create handwritten, I should underline that, flashcards and notes, because it's been proven, you probably read this, that when we write things by hand, we are much more likely to remember it than if we type it. So I'm a big typer. I actually don't like paper. All the staff knows that. I don't like paper around me. However, in this context, it is very important that you do. Take those old index cards. I'm sure they still sell them at Staples. On one side, write that counseling theory if you're going for your CAADC. On the other side, write what the what the definition is of that. Use those until you know them, and then share those flashcards with someone else. Trade. Have them give their flashcards to you, and you give yours to them. And you can both benefit from that. We did that a lot when I had a clinical supervision group. Take practice tests and teach what you have learned. This is one of our best study tips too. If you do didactic sessions with your clients, take something that you learned from your study prep that week and teach it to them, because what you can teach is what you know. And if you have a hard time explaining it, that might be a sign you need to study a little bit more. Bore your family and friends with it, teach it to them too, teach it to other colleagues, and where possible, listen to audio materials as well. Sometimes people will say, I just can't pass that test. Well, I mean, you've already made a decision, right? When you say, I can't pass that test, that's not helpful to you. You need to practice positive self-talk, and we all do. We tell our clients this, right? That we need to practice positive self-talk. But this is one area that we hear a lot. People say, I just can't do it. But you can. Again, you've done other hard things. If you graduated from high school, you had to take exams. If you graduated from college, you had to take even more. This is something that you're able to do. So believe in yourself. If you're here as a supervisor or an agency representative, here are some things you can do to support your people. Organize a small space or a study room. Doesn't even have to be a room. I just had a shelf in my staff room of study materials. So I had a shelf of study materials for the CADC or CAADC. I had another shelf for LMSW exam, another shelf for LPC exam. So create a little library of study materials that they can access, that they can check out, and also allow time during work hours for them to have a study group session. That really shows that you're supporting their professional growth, and it makes sure that they dedicate that time to study. And then when you're doing supervision with them, talk about the benchmarks that they're reaching. I mean, we had someone over the last few weeks that we found out needed a tremendous number of education hours, tremendous. And his development plan was expiring in a very short amount of time. I would encourage you as a supervisor to not let that happen. Be checking in with them during your supervision sessions. How many hours of ongoing education? Have you sent in your job description to CERTME? Have you sent in your transcripts? Check in with them about every marker along the way that is needed in order to get this credential. One of the things when we surveyed people in a development plan that they asked for was this. They wanted people to be checking in with them, specifically their supervisor. And so if one of the staff too could pop into the chat, the development plan guide, we just at MCBAP created a development plan PDF that we've been unveiling over the last couple of weeks that people have really found helpful. And that's something you can use if you're in your own development plan, and it's also something you can use if you're a supervisor. During the time you're taking the exam, remember to breathe. It's so easy when you're anxious to just stop breathing. So consciously make sure that you're taking a breath. If you need to get up and go to the bathroom to take a few deep breaths, you can do that. Even if you're in a testing site, they might have to have you turn your pockets inside out and that kind of thing when you come back, but that's okay. If you need to take a break, you can do that. Make sure that you carefully read all of the directions, even if you've taken a million standardized tests. That also is something that centers you when you're reading those directions. And then slowly read all of the questions and possible answers. 150 questions in 3 hours might sound like that's really fast, but sometimes you need to slow down in order to go faster. So make sure you take your time reading those questions and all the possible answers. Now, in the worst case scenario, if you have to retake this exam, that's actually not a terrible situation to be in, and you're not alone. Make sure that the only downside is if you have waited until the last minute to take it. But if you're preparing early, and we hope you are, this is actually an opportunity for you to learn, because when you are leaving that test center, they will give you a copy of your score, but not only your score, but how you performed in each domain. So if you look at those domains, you'll be able to tell what you need to study in order to retake the exam. And you have a minimum of 90 days between test cycles to be able to do that study. And you'll be able to pass the next time. So we have a few ways to get in touch with us that you're probably familiar with. Our website, we'd love your feedback on this session. If you want to put that in the chat or send us an email, we want to encourage you, please, to put your personal email address in Certimi, not your work email address. Because I always tell the story, I used to work at Henry Ford Allegiance in Jackson. They started out as Foot Hospital, went to Allegiance, went to Henry Ford. Every time they changed their name, they changed their email address. And so if I had given MCBAP at that time my work email address, they would have lost track of me because my email address changed so many times. But my Gmail address that I've had for a million years hasn't changed for a million years. So make sure you use your personal email address. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram because we do post updates there when we have those. You can always email us and, of course, call us. One of the fun things when you follow us on social media that you'll see every once in a while are these spotlights. So we spotlight various people that have our credentials as well as our board members and people who've won the Credential Holder of the Year. So you'll see some of those folks here. They always make me smile. It's like deja vu all over again because we do the same exact test prep session every month, kind of. Every time we have something new to add, we update the materials and the slides, but the same basic information is the same. You're welcome to come to as many of these as you'd like, just knowing that it will be the same. But let's say you got interrupted a lot of times today, go ahead and register and come back and see us again. But again, know that the basic content will be the same. And so now I'm going to stop recording so that we can open it up for questions.